Welcome to the Bay of Quinte Remedial Action Plan's Cover Crop Lunch and Learn. I'm Sarah Madeleine Jones. My colleague Ann Anderson and I will be the behind the scenes people today. Your moderator for this webinar will be Jim McComb, and the panel participants are Matt Glenn from Glen Isle Ag in Keene, Norm Lamothe from Woodley Farms in Cavan, Kevin Cole from Hunko Farms in Coburg, Scott Honey from Lovell Farms in Warkworth. Each panelist will have approximately 15 minutes or thereabouts to provide a brief overview of their farming operation, how they are using and managing cover crops in their operation, what works, what are they still learning, what ideas do they have for the future, obstacles that they have run into. At the end of the presentation, I will outline some stewardship programs that the Remedial Action Plan offers. Colleen Akers from Ontario Soil and Crop will be offering support for the knowledge sharing event attendees and addressing questions on new streams of funding, if anybody has some. Please put your questions in the chat. They will be answered in the Q&A session after the presentations. Ensure that you are muted and your video is off. I will pass this over to Jim McComb now to introduce our first panelist. Jim?
Get there, do the unmute. I want to start by welcoming everybody, and thanks for taking time out of a beautiful spring day. And we're going to start with Matt Glenn. Matt's part of a multi-generational farm around Keene, Glen Isle Farms and Glen Isle Agricultural Services. They're right in near Peterborough, and Glen Isle Farms have been participating in conservation soil practices for 15 years, including the use of cover crops for about 5 years. And Matt and his family are very involved in local community events, and including hosting the International Plowing Match in 2006. Doesn't seem like that long ago, but when it was in Peterborough. Matt is a graduate of University of Guelph diploma program and the C-Team Agricultural Leadership Program offered through the George Morris Center. Matt, take it away.
Great, thanks for having me here today. So a bit about us, we were farming about 1,500 acres. Some of it's on flat land and some of it's in rolling hills of Otonabee, South Monaghan. We grow grain corn, soybeans, winter wheat, and some hay acres as well. Alfalfa Timothy mix for dry hay that we sell. In the past, we were a dairy operation, so we had quite a bit of corn silage, alfalfa in the rotation, and obviously a lot of manure and other organic amendments to the soil. In the past 15 to 20 years, no livestock anymore, so we don't have those amendments to add to the soil. For a long period, we stopped growing corn and grew spring cereals to have the straw to sell. A lot of that market's changed, so we're back into growing grain corn and just to help with the organic matter in the soil and with rotation. So that's a bit about what we've done in the past. I guess you could go to the next slide, please. Would you mind going to the next slide? Perfect. Yeah, so in the past, we grew quite a bit of alfalfa for the dairy operation. So every 3 to 4 years, we'd have that in the rotation, which was definitely beneficial for the soil. When we went away from as many acres, definitely noticed a difference in the soil health. And it if we're not going to be growing more hay acres, the cover crop is essentially taking place of those acres to kind of be that in the rotation. So, and if anyone's got any extra manure, I'd be happy to take some for sure. Next slide, please. So our current practices for conserving the soil and our cover crops. In the spring for planting, we broadcast on soybean acres, one cultivation, and then plant into that. Same with corn from the previous fall. Had one pass with vertical tillage, just a residue there. And then in spring, broadcast fertilizer and one pass with the cultivator and planting. You can see a picture of a no-till drill there now. We've since upgraded to a cart system, so we can actually incorporate dry fertilizer, especially at winter wheat planting time. So it's reducing tillage as much as possible. And where we are doing any tillage, it's cultivator with sweeps or vertical tilt, disturbing the soil as little as we can. Currently with cover crop, after wheat's harvested, we're planting directly into that stubble. The stubble we leave when we're combining is usually 6 to 8 inches. In the past, we've used rye and also oats. Kept it pretty basic so far. Looking to maybe try some different things this year. And in the past, only 1 year we've left the cover crop to overwinter. But right now, I think we're going to stick with burning down that cover crop in the fall. Just any weedscapes that just controlled better in the fall. So that's kind of where we're at right now. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Like I said, we're looking to go to some different mixes of cover crops. And I'm sure some of the other participants here have tried lots of different things and maybe can give me some insight into that. We've also looked at a possibility of doing strip till to place fertilizer to eliminate broadcasting totally. There's some costs incurred to switch to that system, and also we'd have to change our soybean program as well. So that's maybe one of the factors that might stop us from going to that this year or next year. And also looking at use of different biologicals, possibly just to help better use the nutrients that we have. Yep. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So just looking at some of the questions here. The one big thing I did notice with alfalfa out of the rotation, and when alfalfa was going out, we did still have fairly I wouldn't say aggressive tillage then, but our practices have kind of adjusted over time. In the springtime, when there's runoff, when you can see soil in the water, that's definitely not a good sign, right? So just that soil ability to hold moisture, organic matter, the cover crop's definitely replacing the forage where it was becoming a bit of an issue, right? It's just better stewardship to have something hold it there. And in the past, the tillage was a weed control, and we've definitely went away from that and looked to herbicides to control that, which are more effective anyways. So I'll look through that if there's any other questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions, Matt. Gord Speckschneider is asking what changes in your soil you've seen when you dropped alfalfa from your rotation, and how fast did it show up?
Well, I mean, it's over, I wouldn't say immediate, but it's just, I mean, the benefits of nitrogen when you plant corn into, a forage crop. Just the overall, I guess, the soil tilth, right? Just a lot, it seemed to be a lot less organic matter because alfalfa definitely does add a lot, a lot below ground as well compared to above ground, right? So that's mainly market driven, demand for hay and the spring cereals that we're growing for straw. Like those markets change over time. So again, we're adjusting our rotation based on, those markets.
Yeah, very good. A second question from Norm is, if you or anyone else is considering a strip tiller, and we've kind of mulled this around, is there a pay or rent or custom? I don't know of any custom strip tillers in the area.
No, it's a total switch of system, right? It's to be brutally honest, the issue I have with that system now is we're currently growing 15-inch soybeans, and in our area I have issues with the 30-inch beans. That might change, but that's just where I'm at right now. So otherwise that would be, something we'd definitely consider, for sure. The one thing we're looking at doing, you can call me crazy, is when we're planting the cover crop, rather than broadcasting in the fall, incorporating fertilizer with that cover crop planting, with that pass. So that way the next year it's one less broadcast application for corn ground, right? So.
Yeah.
And then that nitrogen applications are all, even on wheat, is split applied, right? So we're trying to spoon feed the crop as much as we can.
So you're banning your fertilizer opposed to broadcasting then, hopefully.
That's the goal eventually. I know the corn planter I need to update to, make better. But again, that's one of those holdbacks is, it's budget and how much can you afford to spend on the planter this year or next year. Or anyone in farming understands how that goes. Yeah.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Great. If there's no other, well, Matt's going to hang around. So if you think of questions, just throw it in the chat. It's and we can address it as it goes. Other panelists, or don't be afraid to grab a question or comment on something that was asked of Matt to get your perspective. So next we're gonna hear from Norm Lamo. And he's from Norm's manager of Woodley Farms, 6th generation family farm near Cavan, Ontario. He grows corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, barley on their 500-acre diverse farm, which includes composting operation and a passive solar greenhouse, as well as commercial maple syrup production. Norm will be sharing his journey and how cover crops with his approach will regenerate the soil. And Norm, I know you're a red clover guy, so I want to hear some comments about when to what to do and when to put red clover on. Go ahead, Norm.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks to the folks for having me part of this group today. I look forward to learning from the other speakers here as well, and certainly Matt brought up some excellent points. So as Jim mentioned, we farm here in Cavan. We're about 500 acres in size, and our philosophies have certainly changed over time. We were hog producers for over 35 years and primarily a 2-crop rotation. We grew corn to feed the pigs, and then we had soybeans in the mix there to add a second crop. Since then, we've really switched our philosophies around rotations and adding new crops to the rotation. We added wheat back in 2015, 2016, and then we've recently added oats as well. And the primary reason for adding oats for us was the ability to get the wheat in the ground a little bit earlier. We're a little cooler climate up here in Peterborough County, and we were finding that we just couldn't get the wheat in the ground quick enough after our soybean harvest. Previously, we would work in that hog manure, but since then we've really gone to primarily no-till system, but some very minimum tillage as needed. Sometimes to deal with the cover crops, and other times to deal with wetter conditions or residues. We cover crop fairly extensively now. We try to put cover crops in 3 of our 4 rotations, and we've used a variety of things over the years, and I'll share some of those with you here today. We're also very interested in building our organic matter, and we discovered the fastest way to do that is through adding organic amendments. We've used biosolids here probably for the last 6 or 7 years. Most recently, we've brought in mushroom compost from the Port Perry area. We've done that for a couple of years now at fairly high levels. And recently, 3 years ago, we started in a compost business as well. So we bring in municipal leaf and yard waste. We compost it here on site. And after about 300 days of curing, we have a nice compost material that we apply to our land. And we're able to cover 30 or 40 acres of our ground with that on an annual basis. One of the challenges with cover crops and figuring out when to terminate the cover crops is just the amount of growth that we have to deal with. We bought a large batwing mower to mow our fields essentially on a couple of occasions when the cover crops were growing, just to sort of keep them at bay. And then obviously you're burning quite a bit of fuel in doing that, and it's an extra labor. So what we've decided is that we're going to implement a rotational grazing program with some sheep that we've purchased here in 2022, and we'll expand that program so that they can graze all of our acres, and they'll have dedicated pasture areas during the growing season. So it's hard to talk about cover crops without talking about small grains. And for anyone that follows the EFAO group, small grains gains is a program that they have where you can actually receive a financial incentive to switch to small grains for anyone that hasn't tried it. And the small grains being a shorter season crop really gives you the opportunity to implement cover crops in what I think is the easiest path to implementation. It obviously having the small grains in the rotation increases the diversity of the root structures and what's feeding the microbes in the soil. For us, it allows for earlier planted wheat, and we were really suffering on yields with our wheat following a soybean program. Having small grains also breaks diseases and pest cycles in the rotation, and as I highlight here, it's the best way to get cover crops in your rotation is to have a small grain, and even if it's only one and being winter wheat, it certainly helps with that program. We're a 500-acre farm, but we don't have a lot of staff here available to work. We have one full-time staff that helps here, and having small grains in the rotation also helps spread out the workload. We're able to plant our earliest spring grains in early April, and then having the harvest season split into summer and fall also helps spread that out for us. The small grains and the cover crops and the volunteer small grains that sprout after harvest also allow for rotational grazing opportunities where we can convert some of that biomass into feed. And as Dave Hooker and his crew at the University of Guelph have shown, you get a significantly amount of higher yields on your corn and beans by adding a small grain into the rotation. And there's a really good study that they've done over long-term rotation trials where they show it's about $125 increase in net profit on the corn and bean yields by having a small grain in the rotation. So if anyone's interested in that, by all means, reach out and I'll point you in that direction. So our cover crop journey started in 2015. And it started with the Ontario Soil and Crop Soil Urundi's test. This is a picture of my son here. We went into our 2-crop rotation and buried a couple pair of white underwear in the fields. And much to our chagrin, after 2 months of time, we pull those underwear out of the ground, and had they fit me, I probably could have thrown them in the wash and wore them. There was really not a lot of microbial activity breakdown on the underwear. That really got me thinking about soil health and what we could do to improve the soil over the longer term. We almost immediately decided that we would start implementing a cover crop program. And in 2016, we started with a very basic broadcast program where we filled a fertilizer spreader, went into our corn crop at sort of 5 to 6 leaf, and just broadcast that seed over top of the canopy. And for anyone getting into cover crops, you really want to look at what you have for equipment, and then what the easiest path to resistance is for trying to implement it. And for us, this was a very cost-effective means of getting into this space. Since then, we've upgraded our equipment quite extensively in how we incorporate our cover crops. This is an image of a Blue Jet nitrogen injector that we modified to be a variable rate wide drop unit where we side dress our nitrogen in season, and we do this at sort of that 6 to 8 leaf stage. And as you can see on the picture on the left, we put an APV cover crop seeder on the unit as well. So we're not making an extra pass to put these cover crops down, and we're able to do it in a timely fashion at the same time that we do our nitrogen application. So cover crops for us involve the crops in 4 of our rotations. 3 of them work really well. One of them we're still trying to figure out. In corn, we do go with a mix, and it's generally a cereal, being a rye or oats. Since we grow oats, it's a cost-effective way for us to get that cover crop down. We also like to add in crimson clover, peas, vetch, and a radish. On beans, we have tried a few times now to plant buckwheat in the standing crop. We do plant on 30-inch rows, so we're able to get into those rows sort of around leaf drop and do a broadcast of the buckwheat. We've had limited success. Again, that window is so short from September to November before frost to get that crop established. But we have had relatively good success, I would say, and we'll continue to try to fit that in. In our oats and barley rotation, it's pretty straightforward. We underseed with red clover, and that happens at planting day. So we literally put our dry fertilizer down. Our red clover gets blended in with that fertilizer at the local fertilizer plant, and we spread that ahead of the drill because the drill has no-till coulters on it, and that kind of works in the fertilizer and the red clover seed into the soil. And with that legume, we obviously have a grass following harvest, because we end up with a lot of volunteer oats and barley that come up afterwards as well. In our wheat, I like it for cover cropping, because I call it the 2-chance cover crop plant. You get the chance to plant red clover first, and if the red clover doesn't work or only works in parts of the field, you can go back in with a multi-species mix and plant out those other areas. Where the red clover fails, and it has in dry years, we will go back in with a multi-species that involves a grass, a brassica, a legume, and we also like to put sunflowers in that mix as well. So here's a couple of examples of some pictures of our cover crop. Here on the left is just a large mix of plants. This is actually part of our pollinator garden that we have here as well. And on the right-hand side, there's an example of a radish. And you can see in that picture, there's quite a bit of rye and radish and clover growing on the ground there. That's an example of a year where we had a really great establishment of cover crops. We're sort of targeting, $10 to $15 an acre for these crops. And we're putting them down, anywhere between 6 and 10 pounds to the acre. Given our size of our farm, we're only kind of planting 150 to 200 acres of each of those crops, and we can time our applications as best we can to get ahead of a rain. And it's really important for getting those crops established that they get a rain within the first few days, especially when they're surface applied. Otherwise, the birds, the rodents, and everything else tend to want to try to get to those seeds. So some of the benefits of cover crops that we're seeing on our farm is the living roots. So we don't terminate our cover crops heading into fall. Matt was certainly talking about the challenges of leaving them over winter. It is a challenge, but we see a strong benefit in having those living root structures available for the bacteria to feed off of, and we'll terminate them either right ahead of planting, at planting, or slightly after planting, depending on the year and the crop that they're going into. No question, better water retention and nutrient cycling as the organic matter starts to increase. Any field that had a cover crop versus a non-cover cropped area, we're seeing higher yields. We've been dry here 4 out of the last 6 years, and we've still managed to turn a profit here on the farm, which I certainly attribute to the water holding capacity of those soils. Pollinator benefits, certainly when you get into the multi-species varieties, and if they're allowed to get to flower, then we do see quite a bit of benefit there from the bees and the rest of the fauna. Better water infiltration. We don't see any issues with water pooling in the fields where we have used these cover crops for several years. The water seems to go into the ground a lot better than it did when we were running manure tankers over the fields, and certainly the mixes allow for different root structures, and the long fibrous roots create the channels that allow that water to get into the ground better. One of the biggest benefits that we've seen on our farm is we're quite sloped. We have small fields and they're all on big hills, but we're not seeing as much spring runoff issues where the water or the little channels of stream runoff are carving holes in the fields any longer. Fuel savings is something that we've noticed as well. We can run our drill across a field that's been in cover crops and is still green at planting, and we'll be running it sort of 14 to 1500 RPM. If it's been a field that we've tilled, we're running that same gear at 1900 to 2000 RPM just to pull that tractor through as those tires spin in the loose dirt. For us, having the cover crop seeder on our equipment or as part of our fertilizer program means that we're not doing a dedicated pass to put the cover crop seed down, which again is another time and fuel savings. No mud. I always say that you can drive over a field that's in cover crop once without making any mud. And even in a very wet spring, you can drive across a field and come out of the field without having any mud on your tires. And the big question around cover crops and when they first came out, or they're first being promoted, there was a lot of talk as to whether or not they were providing a nutrient credit. And I've got a question mark there for the group and for the discussion, and whether or not they are nutrient thief. It takes quite a bit of nitrogen to break them down when you do have those high residue environments. And we kind of see it as a net zero. Any credit that they are creating is being used to help break down the residues. So here's an example of a typical rotation for us, where we've got oats underseeded to red clover. You can see on the left-hand side there's a combine pass and a pass that hasn't been harvested yet. You can, in this case here, the oats were quite short and the clover was quite tall. So at harvest, we were challenged to harvest the heads off the oat plants without harvesting too much of the clover crop. But as you can see there on the right-hand side, after that oat field gets harvested, you have a very lush field of clover. In this case here, I think that clover got to almost waist height, and it was terminated prior to planting wheat that same year. So within a 2-month period between harvesting the oats and planting the wheat, we were able to get quite a large crop of clover established. And it doesn't come without its challenges. We operate in very high residue environments. All of our straw stays on the field, and in that same scenario, this is a very similar field where we had oats planted, and we then killed off the clover, and then went in with our no-till drill to plant our wheat directly into it. And in 2022 was the first year where we saw some slug damage and some slug issues. We'll probably follow these to yield and determine where we can make improvements moving forward. Yeah, so that's my journey to cover cropping, and I look forward to the chat later on, or answering any questions that might have popped up through the presentation.
So Norm, that's a great presentation. I love the looks of your cover crop and your clover. I think about the nitrogen it's producing. Gord has a question. Did you say your cover seed rate at side dress time is 10 pound per acre? What's the success rate? And I'm surprised those species survive the season. Also surprised large seeded species get established. Can you comment on that, Norm?
Yeah, great question. So they don't always survive. It really depends on moisture. But what we found is the larger the seed, the better the germination rate. And the peas, for whatever reason, seem to just grow. So we've used just sort of a feed pea or a cow pea in some of those mixes. And on the driest of seasons, the peas seem to do the best. Where the radish maybe doesn't get established, or the clovers don't seem to want to germinate, the pea seeds, for whatever reason, always seem to stick around. So having that multi-species mix gives us a bit of a benefit there as well.
Great. Paulie's asking the hard question. From your experience, what was the best way to resolve the slug problem?
I think moving forward, we're going to have to do one of two things: graze those fields with the sheep and have them eat the straw and stomp the straw and move that residue around for us, or we're going to bale the straw off. I don't like nutrients leaving the farm, but given where we are with our composting program right now, we always need some biomass to add to our woody materials. And whether we take the straw off to just compost it and then put it back on the field afterwards, we're going to play with that a little bit here this summer for sure. I heard ducks are the best solution for slugs, but I'm not ready to jump into that yet. Excellent.
So if there's any other questions, throw them in the chat so Norm has a little time to think about them. You can read through, and we're going to have follow-up questions at the end of the session. But right now, thanks, Norm. And we'll move on to asking Kevin to queue up. Kevin Cole, he works at Hunko Farms in Cobourg, and also farms with his wife, Shelley, north of Port Hope. And at work and at home, they grow wheat, corn, soybeans, and cover crops. So Kevin, if you're ready, take it away.
Hi, yeah. I've been at Hunko Farms for 36 years, and I work alongside a couple other fellows, Phil and Jason, and Bill, he's just retired. I guess our journey in the cover crops kind of started in something Norm mentioned as a nutrient thing. We used to grow wheat after peas, and grew and harvested peas, and we could grow really good wheat after that. And we started, or when the peas went away, we couldn't grow as good a wheat. So we asked all the questions of how we could get back to doing that, and we told that it was a nitrogen. So we started adding more nitrogen, and we made some big messes. We did get back some of our yield some years, and other years we couldn't. And I guess in 2015, we listened to Dr. Dwayne Beck speak. He talked about cover crop feeding the next year's cash crop. Thought, wow, that's a neat idea. Maybe that's what we. So we started growing cover crops just to see if we could do that. But there was a lot of other benefits come along with that. We farm around 2,950 acres there, and we have it split between an equal 3 rotation of corn, wheat, and soybeans. So all our wheat ground gets a mix of cover crop. It's all the same blend across our soil types. We have a clay loam along the lake and some sand to the north, a sandy loam. We have changed a few of our mixes, but mainly we strive to have a cold season grass and a warm season grass and a warm season broadleaf and a cool season broadleaf. Let all that stuff do its thing in the fall. We don't kill any of it unless we have a real problem with thistles or something like that. We will go in and kill that. But, we spread all our corn ground that we can with cereal rye. This picture that you see ahead of us right now is just spread with our fall potash at 50 pound of the acre, and that seems to work really good. Them fields, when we plant into them green the following spring, and they seem to be our cleanest field. We very seldom have to do a spray on them. They clean. Yeah, we don't work any ground per se. We try and plant. We are an RTK, so we try and plant right between them with 15-inch rows between our 30-inch corn rows. Our corn is planted into the cover crop green. We have a Kinsey planter. It just has a shark tooth ash whippers on it, and try and push that rye to the side. We don't want it touching the corn as it grows. And we seem to get along fairly good with that. We have a different curvatine Dawn closing wheel on one side and a Yetter twister on the other, and that has helped us get the trench we plant. But in the last couple of years, we planted our corn a lot deeper than we used to, and that's kind of big. So I don't know, I'm kind of rambling on here, but one of the biggest benefits that we found from using these cover crops is the weed control. We have some, we used to spray all our fields in the spring with Roundup, and then our wheat comes out, kill all the wheat stubble and clean it up in the fall. With this cover crop, all our wheat ground leaves no glyphosate. So that's broken that for the year anyways. I hope, I'm sure it's not hurting. And the erosion part of it, we've no-tilled. Some of our ground was first no-tilled in 91, and we were full no-till in 98. We did have a brief stint of RTS work with our corn stalks, and we still do a bit of that if we're spreading straw and it doesn't spread real straight. Good, I should say. Try and do that on an angle just to get the wheat straw. It all stays on the field now, and on an angle and try and. This picture ahead of us is us planting corn. This is about the lightest we've ever planted into of green. In 2017, we had turnips and rye and head when we were planting. It was so well. And we got along fairly good. We did have a bit of a slug problem that year, but with the corn, they just seemed to eat away, and then all of a sudden they quit eating it. I don't know. But in that year, we had beans that we couldn't get, or cover crop we couldn't get to corn, so we put it to beans, and we did have some slug problems that year. They've touched wood. We haven't had a lot of slug problems in 4 years. Whether, I don't know really why. Our mix is not really thick of anything. We use oats and rye as our base, cereal rye that is, And that's just, both of them are at 15 pound a piece. The first year we planted it, we were heavier on both of them. And it was really thick in the springing spot with the volunteer wheat and everything too. We've thinned it out. That seems to work very good. So this here picture ahead of us here now is a strip that the very first year we planted, we left this 100-foot wide strip, and we've continuously kept that as our old practice. That's filled in the fall if it's, and we do everything else the same, but it's never had a cover crop. And on our last soil test, I gained 0.25% organic matter on the cover crop part of it. And we weighed that off last fall when we had corn there, and the cover crop side had a slight yield advantage, so 4 bushel. That was just a fluker, but we haven't seen any yield loss, per se, to planting green like that, other than if it gets too dry and we don't get it killed quick enough. A couple of years ago, it was cold and we had wheat to spray, and we started planting both corn and soybeans the same day. So we got the wheat sprayed, and then our soybean program has to be all applied before the beans emerge. So I don't know, everything just comes at once there. It had been too cold to do anything for spraying wise ahead. So we had a bit of corn that we didn't get to quite quick enough. And I don't know whether it was a nitrogen thing, whether the rye took too much nitrogen, but it was definitely a moisture thing. We robbed that field of moisture, and it went for a long time without rain. And we eventually did get rain, but I know it hurt us there. So now we do put a bit of upfront nitrogen with our starter, not a lot, 5 pounds of urea plus the starter, and we're a dry system on our corn planter. So, and we use no liquid fertilizer on our beans anymore. Just planting beans in this dry crop here, and that's one of them wet years, either 2017 or 19. It got fairly high on us, but it was able to carry us. That's a big thing. Like, we had one farm we didn't have anything on, and we had 4.25 inches of rain one day there, and we had some of this stuff planted like this, and we hadn't killed it. So we were trying to get it sprayed, and when we got to the farm that had the cover crop, we were able to float over it, and the farm beside it, we had to leave. You just couldn't get in. This picture here is a field of my brother's, and I used his drill to plant rye in my corn stalks, 4th of November, 3 or 4 years. And took the drill back, and there was a little bit in the bottom, and I said, "You want me to vacuum that out?" And he said, "No, I'll just go back." He planted, I think if you go to the next picture, the pattern. So he planted the right side, that field across, and along that grass waterway. And the next summer I was down there, and I said, "What'd you spray that with?" "Oh," he says, "that's just where I planted that rye." And that's Canada fleabane that had got away on. But that's all the same treatment. To the right is just the 50 pound of rye planted that late in the year. The rest of it didn't have that. And I was just shocked that it would be graded up. And where that fleabane was, their beans were just garbage. That was a good lesson. guess we want to go to the next picture. This was in 2016. And to your right was soybeans on soybeans. We had this whole field in the wheat. And in 2015, we planted cover crop in the wheat stubble, and we put this field back to soy, or we rotated out of wheat to soybeans. And the piece to the right, I don't know whether you can see that line down across there, was wheat. And we had a bunch of guys get in there with pickup trucks and all this spot all up. Just went in and cleaned it up and put it back to soybeans. And so then the following year we had beans on beans again, which wasn't right. When we combined that, it was so dry that year that the stuff to the left, the lowest yield where the cover crop was the highest yield where the soybeans on soybeans. Whether that was the wheat doing that or the cover crop, it was quite noticeable. These were healthier where the cover crop was. That's not a real good picture of it. I need to go to photo school. It was amazing how much healthier they were in there. This is how we mix our cover crops. We just have an old conveyor there. We put our rye and our oats in the bottom of the truck, and then we dump them. We use forage peas and buckwheat, sunflowers, sorghum, crimson clover, radish, and turnips. We have used fava beans and hairy vetch. And we put it in this truck, and then go to the next picture, please. And we put it back in our grain buggy, and then we put it back in the truck, and then back in the grain buggy, and then into our seed wagons, and that mixes it good. We can mix enough seed for 1,000 acres, a couple hours. So it's maybe not perfect, but it's hard to distinguish. We aren't getting a good mix like when you walk through the field. There's we can find anything anywhere most of the time. But speaking of that, we don't grow a whole lot of anything in our mix because we find that we walk across the field, there'll be spots that peas will grow really good. Sunflowers will do. Sunflowers and buckwheat seem to grow anywhere. But like the sorghum and the crimson clover, and some of that stuff just doesn't do as well. So we just keep it thin, but it's all green there. So this picture here is kind of a fill-in late day. I was planting my beans at home and run out. I had one pass left up across the field. So my boys up and they got the bag of cover crop seed that I had left in the crop from the fall before. So it was we just dumped it in the drill, and they both stood up on the drill and kept this little wee bit of seed in all the cups and planted this one pass across the field. And I think the buckwheat came out of the ground flower. But it was neat to walk into this. There was a flower there for most of the year. The peas flowered and the turnips and everything went to flower. And it was just a buzz all the time. You walk in there, and I thought at first it might get stung, but them bees were so hungry, they were just had their head shoved in, and you could just stand there and watch them. And the beans down further away from that strip, you could find aphids on, but you could not find an aphid anywhere near the edge of them beans. Like 100 yards either side of that strip, there wasn't, couldn't find any. Whether that, I don't know. I'm not I don't know. That was just an observation. And this is what our mix looks like when it's coming up, or when it's growing. There's a bit of everything there you can see. Like I say, there'll be spots so that the turnips or the radish just seem to be the only thing that grow. I have no idea. And speaking of that, on a really, really dry year, we have a hard time getting a cover crop established after wheat. In just some places, there's places not even the volunteer wheat, and I don't know why that is. Not huge areas. This is a picture here of likely the best cover crop we had. That was in that field where that strip is. We planted it. It was the first field of wheat off. We were right there the day that get there to plant that right up. And it was, I guess when you take a picture, have somebody standing to show you how tall it is. And maybe you should quit driving the truck too fast for the picture. This was over your head tall. We were a little worried about it. We thought, what are we going to do with this stuff the next spring? There was, I don't know, it all went underground. So, which is super. I guess that's about all I can tell you about what we do. Like our rotation is corn to soybeans and to wheat, and we try. Go ahead.
So speaking of rotation, Polly's asking what type of beans did you grow? Are you growing edibles or?
We're all Roundup Extend soybeans.
Okay. Yeah.
We haven't grew any edible beans for a few years.
Do you think like that one picture is outstanding of the beans with cover crop versus no cover crop? Do you think there's opportunity to not have a herbicide application on beans sometimes, or would you take that chance?
Oh yeah. So I had a picture and I didn't get it sent. In where we spread the rye, and we have a spot nobody can see from the road or anywhere other than the birds and me. And when I was spraying, I shut the boom off for just this past year. And it would be, our boom's 120 foot wide, and I maybe went 100 foot. And I've done this twice. And in that square, there might have been a half a dozen fleabane plants. And they never really got that big even. They just, and the beans, comparing them, like we didn't roll them or anything, the rye, it didn't grow real high. There wasn't a lot of nitrogen. So, but I was amazed how clean it kept both times we've done that. But in saying that, the first time I did that, it turned out that we had variety change in soybeans there. And the one variety growing in that rye, it didn't care that it was there. But the other variety, it didn't like neighbors, and it didn't do very well. So I think there's we need to do some research what we could do in what varieties would work best. So.
Yeah, that's a excellent point, Kevin. Are there any other questions for Kevin? For Kevin and other panelists, how much does your volunteer wheat interfere? Is it okay if we leave that till the end, Gord, and we'll have all the panelists address that? Yeah. Okay. So next up is Scott Honey. Scott Honey is farms near Warkworth in Northumberland County, a farm known as Lowval Farms. The roots of the farm were as a dairy farm and transition to cash crop, beef farm and custom farming operation in the 90s. The operation consists of approximately 1,900 acres, along with 70 beef cows and including a core group of purebred Angus um, cows, and they offer custom planting, custom combining services for farmers in the area. Scott graduated from the University of Guelph agricultural diploma program in 1993, and he's actively involved in the agricultural community at the local and provincial level. And I just have to say, as a fellow beef farmer, Scott's a well-respected member of the cattlemen's beef farmers of Ontario. So go ahead, Scott. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Jim. It's a real pleasure being on this panel. Some real passionate producers here. And I guess I don't have any pictures here. I apologize. My IT department, I didn't get to them quick enough. And really, when I thought about it, all they were with cows grazing cover crops. So we'll just kind of talk about it here. I'm a simple guy. I kind of like to keep things simple, but we started cover crops in the late 90s. We exited the dairy business in 95, had a herd of beef cows and wanted to get more grazing days and extend the season as long as we could to keep those cows off feed. And it really helps our workload in the late fall when we're harvesting corn and beans and everything. So we started, I guess, in the late 90s, just on the land close to home, close to the barn. I got fences all around the fields. Since then, we bought an excavator and every fence is gone. So now I have to use temporary fences. But at that time, my father hated the idea of the cover crops. He thought it was taking nutrients away from the soil. And it took me several years he was all right with the cows grazing, but when I kind of branched out into other land, he thought it was a detriment to it. Took me quite a few years, like he called it my junk, and it's still a big joke. But then once he started seeing that we were having less weeds in the fall and the fields look better with covers on them after wheat, he is pretty quick to get out there with a planter now to get them in. So at this point, like I said, I'm kind of simple. We've tried planting into a little bit of corn, little bit unsuccessful due to our chemical program, I figured. So we've stuck every acre that's wheat gets a cover crop. And we've tried red clover. We've had mixed success. We've had great success to no success. We're getting our land tiled better, but we've had trouble. Those wet spots and the red clover come up through. And my dad was in the combine, and you hear the slip clutch go and the blue smoke coming out of the combine and made for dinner. I was living with Dad at the time, and it made for conversation at breakfast and night. So we've kind of abandoned red clover pretty much because of our lack of success. I guess it hasn't been perfect. We use oats, barley, and peas, which is my favorite. We've used a bit of rye, tillage radish, sunflowers, and sorghum. And when it comes right down to it, we grow our own oats, peas, and barley. We feed some to the calves. We grow it as like underseed it when we're seeding down our hay ground. Excuse me. But my staple is oats, barley, and peas. It keeps it simple. If I'm in the mood, I get a bit of tillage radish or sunflowers or sorghum. And if sorghum's left over in the spring, I'll trickle that in. But for the most part, everything gets oats, peas, and barley. I find it's easy to deal with. It's reasonable cost and very effective for what I'm trying to achieve. So, and the cows love it. It stays green late in the fall. This past year, we had cows out through a snowstorm, grazed it till about the 7th. Well, one snowstorm, we pulled them out just before the second one before Christmas there, and they eat it. It kills off over the winter. I like that about it. Rye, we had the first time I tried planting green, we had slug damage. So now if I use rye, I use it at a very low rate. Oats and peas, we tend to or oats and barley, we tend to pour it on anywhere from 60 to 100 pounds. We use 3 different ways of doing it. We have broadcasted, just put it out there. In the early days, we just broadcasted, let the cows out. But we didn't get the biomass I was looking for, the amount of feed I was looking for. It didn't suppress the weeds as well as I'd hoped. We still had foxtail coming. We burned down everything before we plant it. So we went to using the drill. That works great. Broadcast and vertical tillage, we do that occasionally. If we're trying to incorporate some manure, we've been buying some chicken manure. If we take a farm, we'll do that in the summertime. We'll work that in. That has worked tremendous as well. The drill works great. Broadcasting, I'll do it sometimes if I'm just trying to get something covered. And where our best ground tends to be close to home as well. And that's, so we try and keep over some seed from the previous year in a bin, so that as soon as we get the weed off, get the straw off it, we do sell most of our straw. I guess it's kind of heading towards half, but what gets cover crops is easy to handle, so we bale close to home. Sorry, we sidetracked there, but those oh, sorry, I lost my spot. But jeepers, excuse me. I'll come back to that in a minute. Our goals for the cover crops are always, have always kind of been cow feed, number one, keep the soil covered, reduce the soil erosion because we are on hilly ground, feed the microbes, build soil health, water holding capacity, and turning sunlight into nutrients. Even it either gets all it's utilized by the cows, and 80% of it that goes out in everything that goes in the front, 80% goes out the back. So we're not losing a lot of that product. And the big thing for us is the reduced weed seed bank. We've in the past, we've tried spraying right after the wheat, and when we didn't do cover crops, and the foxtail and different things came quite rapidly, and we'd spray it again and it'd still head out. So now with the covers, it keeps it good. Like I said, the stuff close to home gets the cows on it. The farther away, it is all just green manure. I don't get fussed. So the early stuff, when we keep the seed close, or seed from the year before, we start right away so that we can graze in the fall and get more. The farther away stuff, we planted even into September. I really am just happy if it's covered and green. We get 4 inches, 6 inches, 12 inches. We've had it 6 feet. We've had it 5 feet. We've had it everywhere in between. I'm just happy if the field's covered, and that's how we do it. That I've always we no-till all our corn. We're doing IP beans. So in the past, the last few years, we've kind of been doing a vertical tillage pass. But we can no-till right into that oats very easily. Oats seems to just die off, lay over, and it's very mellow to plant through. We can get it in the ground very well. I find it stays a little damp some springs. Sometimes we have to wait a little more time than my patience will allow, but that is one thing. On the odd spring, it holds it. I couldn't get over, though. We go into these fields and the ground is completely covered with this stuff laying right on the ground, the oats and barley laying right on the ground, and we plant through it and you come back in August and it's gone. Like the bugs have just, the microbes have just eaten it all. It just disappears. People ask me if we get into trouble with compaction with the cows. I haven't noticed that. I don't feel our yields have suffered one little bit by running the cows out there late in the fall with the freeze and thaw action. If we're going to get an extended ugly period with a lot of rain, I can pull them out of there, but I haven't done that in a few years. So we've had very little trouble with that. We've been working with Christine O'Reilly at Omafra. We're doing some studies. They're trying to promote people grazing cattle on people's land, and we're going to do it again this year. But last year here beside our barn, we grew 6,700 pounds of dry matter per acre. The cows, when they measured it, ate between a quarter and half of that 6,700 pounds. They did some compaction studies, didn't really see anything there. Yield, we got to get a bigger area. We were kind of only doing very small spots where the numbers didn't just jive with what the combine saw. Like I didn't, but so that's why we're going to do things again. But I think 6,700 pounds of dry matter out there is significant, and I feel our soil is getting healthier. Our yields are definitely getting better. We've been at this on our homeland here for, like I said, 20 some years, crowding 30 again, 20, 25 years. And we've just keep getting our yields getting better. I know that's, there's a lot of things to that as well with, varieties and planting equipment. And now we're variable rate spreading fertilizer and all these things. But we haven't gone broke by doing this, and we don't intend to stop. And we're really pleased with our reduced erosion, reduced weeds, all those things. But and being a crop or a cow guy too, like our cover crop have in dry years has saved our butt more than once. I don't like to, but I have harvested in late fall and wrapped hay. And, there's been a couple drought years that we didn't get much hay, and, those covers turned on in the fall, and they are a real pain in the butt to bale. Balers don't love that stuff. It's pretty wet, but it kept our costs in check really to get cows through the winter and actually been really well. It's tremendous feed. And the other thing, our cows, when we put them out in the fall, we wean the calves usually before we put them out on that, and they come in after that, like not fat, but they are very, very comfortable in body condition. We're running a good honest 3 on most of them, so 3 out of 5. So like you said, I try and keep it simple. I've enjoyed listening to the other guys and their thoughts on doing it. At this point, I'm not a lover. Comfortable maybe is more word, the word planting green. I've read lots and looked at lots and different people, and I wouldn't say we won't go there, but my comfort level at this point just doesn't want me to go there. You only have so many crops to grow in your life, and I'm uncomfortable screwing them up. So we aren't doing much of that at this point. So that pretty well covers what I have to say. If there are any questions, happy to answer.
Yeah, that's great, Scott. And yeah, I can confirm your cattle come into the ring looking really good. They have nice condition and clean, and they're not pushed with grain ahead of time, which the buyers like, I think. Yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages to getting keeping them on pasture and keeping them late on pasture and keeping your costs down. We're enjoying some good beef prices right now, but us beef guys, we're often having to really watch our costs to be able to make a profit.
Well, maybe you notice my passion maybe is the cows, but the crops seem to pay the bills around here, and we try and be as successful at it as we can. Like I say, we haven't gone broke yet, so that's a positive. So
okay, any questions for Scott before we start firing questions at all the panelists and letting them fight over the questions? Scott's a pretty big guy. I don't know if I'd fight him too much for the questions.
getting pretty slow though, Jim.
Yeah. Yeah. Scott, do you have, like, Christine's working with you? Are you working on like cost per pound of production on the beef?
No,
cover crop?
this study's a little more geared towards crop farmers. The yield advantages or disadvantages, if there is any, trying to do more compaction. You know, the BFO and Beef Farmers of Ontario have done a lot of work trying to promote cash croppers and beef farmers to work together, utilizing cover crops. And it's gone over very poorly, and I'm on both sides of it, so I understand that. So that's why I kind of latched on to the project with them. Not everybody wants cows on their place, you know. Fencing's not hard. Like we
No.
we went around 70 acres with a temporary fence last fall in probably 4 hours. It'll take a couple hours to take it down. Not a big deal. So it's not hard. So that's what we're working on, that just to see where the numbers kind of come in. But we just got to do it, replicate it again, and do larger area in the field. So
what do you do for water then, Scott?
So so close to home, there's water. They can, in the fall, they go to a spring. In our pasture system, we have like 20 some paddocks. We have 6,700 feet of water line on top of the ground that goes to each paddock for summertime. But they're usually close enough. If they're over next to the highway, which would be between a half a mile and a mile away, then they go to a spring.
Okay.
They go to a spring. Otherwise, they come back to the barn. And when they're across the road, they walk to my dad's. Actually, last fall, they got out there for a couple of days. We had a week, there was snow, and they utilized snow for water till it went away. And then they walked to my dad's, which is half a mile. But when they're getting ready to calve, walking's good. I should walk more myself, but makes them calve better the further they walk. So anyways.
Perfect. So, thank you very much, Scott. That was great. Very informative. And it looks like we're ready to bring all the panelists back and do a rapid fire of questions at them. Make it as hard as you can on them, because we need to make these guys sweat. Cover cropping's not easy. There's lots of challenges, and this is your chance to get some of your questions answered and solve some of those problems before you get in season. So I'm going to start at the bottom and work up. Let's see. Maybe I missed this part. Jennifer's asking, maybe I missed this part, but with cover crop on corn, is there a yield drag? Panelists, what kind of yield drag are you seeing, or is there a yield drag cover crop on corn?
Too afraid to answer. We haven't measured it. We've switched out of rye as our cereal. There was some discussions as to whether or not rye brought down the yield in corn. But no, we haven't specifically measured it. I see more benefit of having living roots through the period that the corn's dying down for the microbes than any yield impact.
Yeah, I think in our situation, we have that one strip that we measure and it hasn't showed any real negative. But like earlier, like if we have a field that maybe gets too big and takes away moisture, yeah, there is going to be a negative effect to that. First on a dry year, I think it can help, like a or a wet year, I should say. Wet year, that rye gets rid of some moisture, keeps that plant in better conditions for the corn.
Yeah, great, Kevin. Thanks. A question from Matt. With cattle grazing, any idea of amount of nutrients removed versus left for the next year's crop?
Well, I guess I haven't seen that part of the study yet, because they did do soil samples before and after in the same spots. So I haven't seen that data. But the way I look at the cover crops and the cows out there as a bonus, you get, if you have 6,700 pounds of, that's what we grew that in that spot, and you're only use a third as an average. So, and then what the cows eat, 80% of it goes back out as urine and manure. My thought is I'm adding, because I feel those cows are adding some micronutrients that maybe I think they're adding to it. That's my thought. But I use my soil. I just use it as a bonus. I don't reduce because of it. I'm trying to build our soil and our nutrient levels, so when we go back in and regrid sample, then maybe when we get spreading fertilizer, we need less. That's the way I look at that. But I feel they're adding between the cows and the cover crop.
Yeah, very good. Norm, what are you thinking? You've got some sheep. You didn't buy them just to chase them down the road, did you? Or
No, they're supposed to be lawnmowers, and some of them will end up in the meat market. But absolutely, I think the nutrient cycling of the cover crops and then the sheep converting it to an available nutrient form will only add fertilizer to the program.
yeah, I'd agree. The way I look at it is you've got maybe some nitrogen left over after wheat. Soil tests I pulled this past year indicated up to 80 pounds left over from a great wheat crop. So maybe cover crops is a way of capturing that nitrogen, and Scott's changing it into beef and Norm's changing it into I don't know what you call it, mutton. Is it? Yeah. So lots of questions coming at us. Gord's asking, is the research or field trials you would like to see? Is there research or field trials you would like to see in our area? What questions remain unanswered regarding covers? Gord, you're asking that with a soil and crop perspective, I think. What trials do you want to see, guys?
I'd love to see a trial on how much nitrogen is required, or how much nitrogen is being tied up by the breakdown of our cover crops. And I've heard of some producers who are applying nitrogen to the cover crop post spray to help it with the breakdown process. And is that required, and how much is required, and how much nitrogen from the subsequent crop? Is it tying up? I'm thinking mostly of that multi-species mix where you're planting corn into that large mat or of green or brown, depending on your program. But there's a lot of material there, and as Scott said, you go back there at the end of the season and it's all gone. Something broke it down, and I know nitrogen plays a role, but how much of that?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Norm. Kevin, do you want to take a crack at that one too?
Are you taking a tractor?
I guess, as far as the nitrogen part of cover crop, breaking it down, I look at it in a little different way. That this is kind of like a relay thing, and we just have our nutrients are being cycled, and as long as we have a living plant in there, carrying the next relay, even if Bub is one of the relay guys, which is, you got to have that fourth guy there if it's a 4-man race. But yeah, I agree with Norm. It would be neat to see how much of that is being tied up. We see, like, I think we put that extra nitrogen with it now just for that reason. But we're,
Yep.
I don't.
Yeah, interesting. And that kind of hopefully answers Gord's question about seeing nitrogen tie up in the spring and using early nitrogen to compensate. Yeah, so Matt's asking what type of planting equipment are you using now, and thoughts on updates going ahead to apply fertilizer and cover crops.
Yeah, I'd asked that question to Scott Honey if he had any insights. I know
Okay.
I've looking.
Well, I guess so. Our corn planter's a 1790 John Deere with interplant, so we can do 15s and 30-inch rows. We did switch from liquid fertilizer to dry Alari system 3 years ago, I guess. I've been very pleased with that. So we have added, I guess we've done a little bit of studies on how much, where the sweet spot is. And I know we could variable rate it. We haven't done that because we are aiming for 30 units nitrogen through the corn planter. So it's very hard to do that. We variable rate our broadcast. That's what we tend to do. So like I said, my cover crops to me are just a bonus. I'm really not subtracting, adding. I just treat it as a bonus. And if there is residual, hopefully it'll go onto our soil, stay in soil to build our soil test. That's because our soils here, we've been like everybody else. We haven't been as generous over the years, and we are coming, and I do believe in variable rate broadcasting. We've done 100 acres here west of our barn. We've done it several years now with variable rate, and last fall we redid it, and it was getting pretty close that we did it a straight blend. Maybe it's because I was being a little cheap last fall, but the soil test didn't show us. We're bringing the soil test better. I really like this Alari system. It makes an already heavy machine much heavier on our hills, but dry fertilizer versus liquid, I feel we're getting a bigger bang for our buck. We're getting more nutrients in the right place and at a cheaper cost, and that lasts longer, I feel. So hope that answers what you're thinking or asking.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm just looking to update my planner, so I want some do's and don'ts, more or less. So you've tried more than I have so far.
We use a 1590 box drill as well for planting beans and planting our wheat. That's what we use. We try and do as much as we can with the 30-foot planter, but we have small fields as well. We put the big planter or big dust planter in the larger fields and get over the acres, and then the little drill, we do them with the small fields. And I guess we've learned to run deeper on both corn and beans. We've had a lot better success since we got planting both beans and corn deeper. We used to have trouble with getting beans through the drill, through the trash, and that was just because we were trying to be shallow. Thought we got a little more pop up, but we seem to, anytime we get a loss, it's because we planted too shallow than too deep. So.
Okay, great. Gord's asking, setup for planting green, yes, no, why? Roller crimpers, row cleaners, nose colders, down pressure gauge wheels. Is anybody using a roller crimper or? No, no. So roller crimper, the ones I've seen are usually mounted on the front of the tractor, and then you're planting usually beans right behind it. You're crimping. Rye crimp's really good, and then you're planting green right into that freshly crimped and rye, and it's supposed to pretty well kill the rye, terminate it, and it does a pretty good job if it's done right. So
Having those, did you say you're using trash whippers there? Or road cleaners?
Yeah, we have,
heavy does it wrap on the road cleaners at all, or is it shoving it out fine and not balling it up?
we went to a shark tooth blade on our Martin row cleaners last year. They don't seem to plug up too bad. Like, yeah, the odd time you'll have a little bit of mud stick in the base of them. The design of them with that, when it's coming out of the ground, it's pointing down. That really helps keep it from wrapping. We had straight ones and they would kind of plug full of stuff. We've had great success with, or last year anyways, but even the old ones, they didn't have a lot of problems with it. We do find that if that rye is touching the corn, it seems to affect it. And it's just nice to have it pushed to the side, and it kind of it's dying then, hopefully, anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're the same on our farm. We've got the Martin row cleaners on our corn planter, and we haven't had any wrapping issues with the cover crop. We've tried it in the plant green scenario through clover, and no real issues. And just on that plant green note, I know there's some guys that have had good success with it. I think Jake Monroe's from Omafra has some data out that says there is definitely a yield hit long term. Trying in the plant green scenario, but I know on heavy clays, there's guys like Larry Dick down in Niagara that are having huge success with it, only because they can get onto the ground at times that they normally wouldn't have not been able to. And for him, it's a difference between having a crop and not having a crop. But I think on most loam soil type soils, planting green does have a financial and yield hit.
okay, great. I've got one other question. I know there's someone in the audience that might know the answer. Are you guys crop insurance and have crop insurance on your cover crops?
No, I don't.
Oh, we don't.
No, I think Bill Honey's on. Bill, do you want to just either answer in the comments or unmute? Can you get crop insurance for cover crops?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Jim?
Yep. Yeah, that's perfect, Bill.
Yep. Yes, you can, Jim. We insure under the standards coverage like we used to have for red clover, still do. The trouble is, and it's a little bit, it hasn't really gone, that coverage has not gone over well. The reason it has not is because it's not yield-based, it's strictly emergence-based and establishment coverage. So the trouble is, I know from my own experience, back in 16, the driest year I ever saw, we stood here and wondered, what should we do? First of all, should we get a cover crop going or not? And there's no forecast of rain. And the one thing we come to conclude was that one thing for sure, if we don't plant it, we won't get it. So we went ahead and we were successful in getting a great cover crop that fall. That is my own experience. And because of that established only coverage, like I say, guys, I wouldn't be pushing it on you. It really hasn't gone over that well. And it's not really great coverage for you.
Yeah. Well, I like your attitude, Bill. Do it and the rain will come. It doesn't take very much sometimes to get the cover crop started and growing. And then as you roll into fall, it's the rains do come, maybe too much sometimes. So
Just one other point on that, Jim, while I'm at it here, can't rid of me. As far as the coverage goes, you can go with your premium coverage, just basically for alfalfa-based mixtures and whatnot that are over $40 an acre sort of thing. The coverage for that, for premium, is a lot less than for standard, and your coverage dollars are a lot better. The reason for that is history of establishment. Alfalfa has tended to establish, and there's been this controversial issue with the red clover in many years gone by, and that's basically why there's a lot of claims paid out the standard over the years.
okay, thanks, Bill. That's great input from a guy with some expertise in the insurance business. So now, do we want to move forward, and should we be saving some time for our soil and crop representative to talk about the upcoming opportunities for funding?
Yeah, that would be great. Jim, I think Colleen is on the line and she will have a link to put in the chat. And I would just like to thank everybody for participating in this. This was wonderful. And I'm sure people learned a lot. I am just going to, if I can, bring up, we offer through the Remedial Action Plan some programs, and let me just share this. There we go. For farmers around the Bay of Quinte area. So if you're sort of people that are participating or people that are attending, if you farm around the Bay of Quinte area, we offer some stewardship programs, livestock fencing, alternate watering, shoreline and waterway planting projects, and some erosion and water quality control projects. And we will pay up to about $7,500, 75% to a maximum of $7,500 on most of those. We also offer for people in the area of free soil testing. And we also offer a grant for cover crops for $30 an acre up to $2,500. So you can see, you can get hold of Jason or Robert. If you're more interested and want more information, you can just go to our website, and it's bqrap.ca. And if you go to get involved, rural stewardship or our healthy soils, you'll find more information there. But those are some opportunities that are available to people. If you're south of number 7 within the Lower Trenton Quinte watersheds, you should be eligible.